It's almost hard to believe, looking at U.S.-China trade right now. I mean, the tariffs, they're not just taxes anymore, are they? They feel more like, well, complete roadblocks.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking, what, 145% from the U.S. side?
145%, exactly. And China hitting back with 125%, it's a full-on tariff war.
It really is. Those kinds of levels just change the entire game, the whole economic calculation for trading between them, huge pressure on businesses and, consumers too.
Right. And now, against that backdrop, something maybe significant is happening. Top officials are actually going to meet face-to-face in Switzerland.
That's the plan. For the U.S., Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Jamieson Greer, the trade rep.
And for China,
Vice Premier He Lifeng. And what's key here, as you said, this is really the first big sit-down since these massive tariffs really kicked in.
So the timing feels important. It's the first chance, really, at that level, to talk directly about the situation, the 145%, the 125%.
Yeah, a chance to maybe find a way forward, or at least talk about finding one. The stakes are just incredibly high.
Okay, so that's what we're digging into in this deep dive. We want to get past the headlines, understand the power dynamics, what's really going on.
And the economic fallout, right? What have we actually seen happen so far?
Exactly. And then, what could realistically come out of these talks in Switzerland?
Yeah.
We've looked at a whole range of sources for you. CNA, Reddit's Ask Economics, which had some interesting points, CPPR, Sturf's modeling.
Also Newsweek, CBS, the Economic Times, Al Jazeera, and a pretty detailed briefing doc pulling from multiple places.
So the mission for you listening is to get a really clear picture of this, pretty complex situation without feeling totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, we're aiming to pull out the key insights, maybe even some surprising bits, give you a solid takeaway.
Okay, let's start with the basics then. Why now? What are the official reasons both sides are giving for having these talks?
Well, from the U.S. side, the official line is still about addressing what they call unfair trade practices by China.
And bringing manufacturing back home.
That's a big part of the narrative, definitely. Incentivizing that return. China, well, they frame it very differently, as you'd expect.
About the tariffs gone, right?
Primarily, yes, remove the tariffs. And they consistently emphasize the damage these U.S. actions are doing globally, not just to them.
And it sounds like the U.S. is already trying to manage expectations. Scott Bessent mentioned focusing first on de-escalation.
Yeah, that was noted. Not aiming for some grand bargain right out of the gate, which honestly makes sense.
Why do you say that?
Well, given how high the tensions are, the sheer level of disagreement, aiming for de-escalation first, just trying to lower the temperature, that seems like a practical step. Find some common ground before you tackle the massive stuff.
Okay, now something that really stood out from the sources. This idea that China might actually be walking into these talks feeling, well, stronger than maybe we assume.
That's a really interesting point coming through in the analysis, yeah. One key argument is that the U.S. might have pushed for these talks because of its own domestic economic pressures.
So the tariffs are starting to bite back home in the U.S.
That's the suggestion. Wang Dan at Eurasian Group pointed to that specifically. The idea that the U.S. is feeling the heat internally, and that's motivating them to talk now.
Interesting. And this connects to that other concept, China's higher tolerance for pain. Chiku.
Exactly. Dexter Tiff Roberts at the Atlantic Council wrote about this. It's this idea of cultural and political resilience, being able to withstand economic hardship, maybe more readily than, say, the U.S. system can. Eating bitterness, as it translates.
So that gives them more leverage in negotiations, like they can wait it out longer.
It suggests they can hold their ground more firmly. And their messaging has been super consistent on this. No real talks without serious tariff relief. They've pushed back hard against anything they see as coercion and blackmail.
Pretty strong language. And didn't they even deny some earlier U.S. claims that talks were already happening?
He did, yeah. Which, again, feels like signaling, controlling the narrative, saying we're not being dragged to the table on your terms. It sets a certain tone for this meeting.
Okay, so leverage aside, both sides are feeling the pain from these tariffs. Let's break that down. What are the specific problems in the U.S.?
Well, for the U.S., it's becoming more visible, things you might notice. Worries about empty shelves in stores, definitely higher prices for consumers on everyday stuff.
Yeah, you feel that at the grocery store.
Right. And just general economic wobbles, stock market volatility, some weird mixed signals on inflation. It creates uncertainty for people.
Okay, hitting the consumer directly. What about China? Where's the pain point for them?
In China, it might be less obvious day to day for the average consumer's prices, but the hit to their export sector is huge. Goldman Sachs had an estimate, potentially up to 16 million jobs affected. export-related jobs.
16 million, wow. That's a massive number.
It really is. And then you look at the broader economic modeling, like the work CF did using the Oxford economic model.
What did that show?
Significant drag on U.S. GDP growth. They projected potentially up to minus 1.2% in 2025. And U.S. inflation pushed up by almost 0.8 percentage points.
So slower growth and higher prices in the U.S.
Yeah. And importantly, their models showed negative spillover effects for the euro area, too. It's not just a U.S.-China thing. It ripples outwards. And critically, they found retaliation, like China's tariffs, makes all these negative effects worse.
It really drives home the global cost. It reminds me of that Reddit post I saw.
Yeah.
Some first-year economics student basically saying, hey, my textbook says tariffs are bad for everyone involved, so why are we doing this?
Yeah, it's that classic clash, isn't it? Textbook theory versus the messy reality of politics, strategy, domestic pressures, all driving real-world policy that seems to contradict Econ 101.
So much for simple models. Now let's talk Trump, because that adds another layer of unpredictability. We're at 145% total tariff load on China now.
Roughly, yeah, combining the different types.
But then Trump recently just throws out 80% seems right and adds up to Scott B. What do we even make of that?
I mean, it's classic Trump, right? It injects huge uncertainty, but also maybe flexibility. Mentioning Scott Bessent by name like that, it suggests Bessent has significant leeway, or that adjustments are genuinely on the table.
It makes you wonder if 145% was ever sustainable. Some argued it was basically an embargo at that level.
That's a very fair point. It's so high it chokes off trade. So floating a lower number, is it a genuine opening move for de-escalation? Is it just a tactic? Start high, offer a cut.
Or maybe a way for both sides to claim a win later if they land somewhere lower.
That's also plausible, a way to save face. But it also highlights the contradictions in U.S. goals, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, you want tariff revenue, maybe, but you also want more market access in China, which usually means lower tariffs. You want to isolate China, but you need allies for other trade deals. It's trying to juggle competing aims.
Yeah, it seems complicated. That UBS analysis suggesting a possible settlement around 34%. That feels like a world away from 145% or 80%.
It shows the range of possibilities analysts are considering, somewhere that maybe balances those conflicting pressures.
Okay, so while the U.S. side might be signaling some potential movement, maybe, what has China been doing strategically? What's their longer game here?
China's been very actively working not to be solely reliant on the U.S. market. That's key.
Like the Belt and Road Initiative.
Exactly. And strengthening ties with countries in the global south. They've been quite successful, the analysis suggests, in developing replacement markets for their exports. Maybe more successful than the U.S. has been in finding replacements for key Chinese imports.
So they've diversified more effectively.
It appears so. And you also can't ignore the huge internal changes in China, that tremendous economic restructure, especially around the digital economy. That provides its own growth engine, regardless of trade tensions.
What about those recent small moves by their central bank? Cutting the reserve ratio for banks, was that a sign of trade war panic?
Most analysts don't read it that way. It's seen more as a strategic fine-tuning, making sure there's enough money flowing in the system, providing some targeted support.
So preparation, not panic.
More like prudent preparation. It signals they're ready for a potentially long dispute, making sure their domestic economy is resilient. It definitely doesn't look like they're backing off their overall GDP growth targets because of this.
Okay, so bringing it back to the Switzerland meeting, given everything we've discussed, the leverage, the pain, the strategies, what's the most likely outcome? Are we expecting handshakes and deals?
Honestly, expectations should probably be pretty low for a major breakthrough in this first meeting.
Yeah, that seems to be the consensus.
The positions are just too far apart right now. The issue's too complex for a quick fix.
So maybe just agreeing to keep talking.
That feels much more probable. De-escalation, like Bessent mentioned. Symbolic progress. Maybe they commit to a schedule for more talks, perhaps some very small, specific tariff rollbacks as a goodwill gesture.
And for China, the key thing is seeing the U.S. willing to actually discuss removing the big tariffs.
That seems to be their bottom line, a sign of sincerity, as they might put it. Without that, it's hard to see major progress from their perspective.
Could we see any smaller technical deals, like on currency or export quotas for specific things?
That's possible, yeah. Sometimes progress happens on the margins, on less politically charged technical issues, the whole Taiwan question being linked. That feels much more speculative and very sensitive, probably not for this initial stage.
It really feels like whatever happens in this specific meeting, the bigger picture, the long-term trend might still be towards some kind of U.S.-China decoupling.
I think that's a very important perspective to keep in mind. These talks are happening, yes, but the fundamental drivers of the conflict, strategic competition, different economic models, those aren't going away quickly.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Key takeaways seem to be China feels it has some leverage, partly due to U.S. domestic pressures and their own strategic moves.
Right. Both sides are definitely feeling economic pain, though it manifests differently.
Trump's recent tariff comments add uncertainty, but maybe hint at negotiating room.
But overall, expectations for the Switzerland meeting are pretty low. No quick fixes expected.
It really makes you step back and think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Given how deep these issues run, what would a win even look like for either side in this whole thing?
That's the million-dollar question, maybe trillion-dollar.
And beyond just these tariffs, what does it all mean for the global economy long term? How are supply chains really changing underneath all this? It forces you to think about those bigger shifts.
Absolutely. What constitutes success here is shifting, and the global economic map is definitely being redrawn. Those are the big questions to keep pondering.
Well, thank you for walking through all that with me. It's certainly a complex picture, but I feel like I've got a much better handle on it now.